Welcome everyone to ZOLEO Campfire Chats. We're so excited to have you here with us today. Whether you're joining as a beginner or expert, this is a space where we could all learn from each other, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Sammy from ZOLEO. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes to make sure that this is a positive and engaging space for everyone. Number one, your comfort matters. We want this to feel like a welcoming campfire circle, so just relax, be yourself, and enjoy the dialogue. Number two, if you have a question or comment, please use the Q&A box in the top ribbon following the icon on the slide. For the duration of the presentation, your cameras and mics will be off, so we'll try to bring as many of your thoughts and into the conversation as possible through the Q&A box. There are a few members of the ZOLEO team with us today, so I'd first like to introduce Lou. He's our product expert, and he'll be addressing any ZOLEO or product-related questions live in the Q&A box. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Lauren. Lauren is our moderator for today's session, and she'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A box and running the Q&A portion for today. Lastly, please remember that respect is key. So please treat everyone here with kindness and courtesy because every voice here matters. We're truly thrilled to have such a diverse mix of perspectives here today. So let's make this a space where everyone can learn and grow from each other. With that said, we are so excited to introduce our debut guest. He's a pioneer in ultralight backpacking. He's a leader in backcountry education, and he's the visionary founder of Backpacking Light. Give it up for Ryan Jordan.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Sammy, for the kind introduction, and to ZOLEO for inviting me to be here today. I'm an engineer and a scientist by training and profession. I began my career as a research professor at Montana State University studying biological systems, and specifically how human physiology interacts with the textiles and materials that we use in outdoor gear and with the outside environment itself. That intersection between people, materials, and the natural world has remained a consistent theme throughout my career, and we're going to explore that intersection today as we look at risk management in the backcountry. For the past 30 years, I've also worked as a professional guide, outdoor educator, consultant, and a publisher, and it's this combination of evidence-based research and field practice and teaching that has kind of shaped the perspective that I'm bringing to the table today. And I'm genuinely delighted to share some of that perspective and a little bit of my enthusiasm about the relationship between humans and the backcountry. Today's talk captures a theme: traveling off-trail in wilderness environments that's been central to both my professional and personal life for the past 4 decades. When I founded Backpacking Light 25 years ago, the goal wasn't just to promote a lightweight gear ethic. It was to create a platform for evidence-based learning in the outdoors. We wanted to bring engineering, science, and real-world experience all together to understand why things work in the field, why they fail, and how to design better systems for backcountry travel. And over the years, Backpacking Light evolved into a community of really passionate practitioners, people who care not just about saving weight, but about applying systems thinking to every decision they make in the backcountry. And this systems thinking philosophy can help you understand how to deal with adversity in the backcountry and enjoy it with a very high level of competence and confidence. And going off trail is, in a way, kind of the ultimate test of that philosophy. When you leave the trail, you leave predictability behind, and your ability to manage complexity becomes the single most important skill that you have. And that's what I want to explore with you today. Everyone has their own motivations for traveling off trail, and finding obscure alpine lakes inhabited by trout is certainly one of mine. But my entry into the world of off-trail travel really came through mountaineering. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and leaving the trail was sort of a necessary prerequisite if I wanted to reach the summits of the glaciated peaks in the Olympics and Cascade Mountains. This photo is from a few years ago on a climb of Gannett Peak in Wyoming's Wind River Range as part of a 70-mile traverse of the Wind River crest. Lots of bushwhacking, lots of glacier travel, lots of scrambling through alpine tundra and talus. In addition, I've been exploring the backcountry by Packraft for more than 20 years now and find it to be a really incredible tool for linking remote rivers together, which often requires going off trail, to traverse up and over the ridges and peaks between your last takeout point and your next put-in point. Backcountry hunters know all too well the pains and rewards of traveling off trail, and I'm constantly amazed at how fast this particular genre of backcountry travel is evolving. Not only in terms of how seriously hunters are training and preparing for these types of expeditions, but the extent to which they are practicing ultralight backpacking techniques to reach impossibly remote locations in search of big game. And although the last several slides focus mainly on human-powered backcountry travel, off-trail still has some important connotations for motorized users as well. So whether you're a snowmobiler or motorcycle adventurer or overlander, and I've engaged in all of these activities as well, and much of what you'll hear from me today is going to be relevant to those of you who are traveling off the beaten path via other modes of travel too. But this is my real jam. Extended traverses of high alpine tundra, talus, rock, and scree with healthy doses of bushwhacking thrown in to explore the mountain high country. I live in Estes Park, Colorado. It's the gateway community to Rocky Mountain National Park. It's a really spectacular place with 12 to 14,000 foot peaks and alpine lakes and one of the largest elk herds in the United States. We have about 2,000 to 3,000 elk here. The wilderness, including and adjacent to Rocky Mountain National Park, is more than 500,000 acres in size, and it includes more than 600 miles of hiking trails. That's what, 1,000 kilometers for those of you out there who've adopted more advanced measurement systems. So if you like hiking, this place is paradise. And on any given day, you'll see people from all over the world starting their adventures right here. Now, this is a national park. So on any given Saturday during the peak of the summer hiking season on the most popular trails, you may encounter a scene like this. Granted, this is actually not a normal scene anymore because this photo was taken before the visitor use permit system was put in place, but it does reflect the general idea that there are a lot of people out there who are passionate about hiking. Estes Park, which is a town that has a year-round population of less than 5,000 residents, gets a whopping 5.4 million visits a year. Of those 5.4 million, 4 million of those visits are day hikes, visits to the national park, visits to Rocky Mountain National Park. And then we have 2 million visits that are day hikes. 200,000 of those hikes, only 200,000 of those hikes go into the backcountry beyond a mile from your car. 20,000 of those people spend the night in the wilderness backcountry of Rocky Mountain National Park. And of those, less than 2,000 of those people actually go on off-trail hikes. And then we can narrow that down even further in a place like this, which is an alpine lake in Rocky Mountain National Park that sits at nearly 12,000 feet in elevation and may see less than 10 visitors in a single year. And yes, this is the same national park you saw in the photo on the previous slide. But here, there's no trail. The lake has no name. The terrain requires several hours of bushwhacking and talus scrambling with complicated navigation. And unless you're an accomplished endurance athlete, you're going to spend at least one night in the backcountry while visiting this spot. This, of course, is what off-trail travel in the backcountry can offer: solitude and altitude. And today, I hope to give you some tools that will help you build some fortitude so you can visit places like this as well. To flourish and thrive in an environment like this depends on the health and interaction of a few critical systems: the body, the mind, the environment, and the tools or the gear that you use to connect them all. This model, which is called the Wilderness Systems Framework, sits at the core of how I think, train, and teach about backcountry travel. It's the foundation of my pedagogical framework for outdoor education and the structure that I've used to design field courses and guide training programs and risk management curricula for more than 20 years. It's built on the simple premise that the wilderness is not a backdrop, it's an active participant. And when we enter that system, we become part of a dynamic network of forces. Each subsystem within that network has boundaries. The body has metabolic and mechanical limits. The mind has cognitive and emotional bandwidth. The environment offers climatic volatility and terrain constraints. And our tools, whether that's our gear, our clothing, shelter, cooking, or even our communication systems, the gear mediates the relationship between the other three systems. So if any one of these systems fails, the other systems start to destabilize. And in a remote wilderness environment, you can't really isolate problems with any one system and put them in a little box. Instead, these problems compound because these systems are so closely related and integrated with each other. So effective backcountry performance is not about mastering any single one of these systems. It's about recognizing the feedback loops between them and learning to manage those loops in real time. And that's the essence of my teaching practice, which is helping people see the wilderness not as a challenge to conquer or overcome, but as a system to understand and then adapt to. We're going to start today with the body, because in the wilderness systems framework, the body sort of drives everything else. When the body begins to fail, the mind kind of follows, judgment collapses, you start making bad decisions about how to use your gear, and environmental stress becomes much harder to manage. Most of us measure distance in miles or kilometers, as if all miles were created equal. In the backcountry, of course, that's not true. Some miles are going to be steeper than others. Some miles are on rougher trails like the one you see in this photo. And some miles are hiked at higher altitude, which levies its own kind of tax. Now, once you leave the trail, the cost of walking a mile can really be magnified. Imagine what's required to traverse a mile of steep talus, or bushwhack through a stand of slide alder or crumholz, or over rotten snow. These kinds of miles can consume 3 or 4 or more times the energy of a mile on a maintained trail. And that's where the concept of the Metabolic Energy Mile, or MEM, comes in. One metabolic energy mile is equivalent to the amount of effort or metabolic cost or calories required to walk 1 mile on a flat treadmill at your most efficient walking pace with no pack weight. So if we say that a particular trail in Rocky Mountain National Park, which is 5 miles long, requires 10 metabolic energy miles of effort, what we're saying is that this 5-mile hike is going to feel like walking 10 miles on that treadmill. MEM, of course, considers distance and elevation gain, but it also integrates terrain irregularities and ground cover like mud or snow, grade, steepness, pack weight, altitude, and your level of fitness. So we can use this model to provide a more realistic measure of the physiological cost of how much energy it actually takes to move through a wilderness landscape. Think of MEM as a universal translator between what the map and the terrain tells you and what your body will experience. It's the bridge between terrain, topography, and your metabolism. Now, in practical terms, MEM helps predict fatigue and energy expenditure in varied terrain. It improves planning for nutrition, hydration, and pacing. It even helps define risk thresholds, because when you understand where your metabolic cliffs or limits are, you can anticipate when fatigue sets in, because fatigue is a big trigger for defining your decision-making quality. So in short, MEM transforms mileage from a geometric measure into a physiological one. And once you see the landscape through a physiological lens, you'll never look at a map the same way again. And it can completely transform how you estimate food requirements and the time required to complete a route, and the risk you take on when you attempt something that's not certain. So let's see how this works in action a little bit. I'm not going to go too much into the numbers here, but basically that bottom table shows 3 hikes. They're all hikes of the exact same trail. Hike 1 is no pack weight and you're feeling good. You're in good metabolic shape. There's no fatigue. Hike 2 is the same hike repeated, no pack weight, but now you're in a state of fatigue. And this particular one was recorded when I was in a state of training fatigue. And then hike 3 is a non-fatigued state while carrying a backpack. So you can see from the blue and red boxes that the presence of fatigue, which is modeled through our metabolic energy mile framework, adds 12% of metabolic cost. So fatigue has a real impact on your effort that you put into a hike. Likewise, in hike 3, I'm carrying a 30-pound pack. This adds 46% to the metabolic cost of doing that exact same trail. One way we can use the MEM model is to estimate hiking times. And in this particular example, I know that my optimum or most energy efficient pace on a treadmill with no pack weight is about 3.5 miles per hour. So for the hike 3 scenario, which is down here towards the bottom on the lower left, we can divide 3.3 metabolic energy miles, which is the equivalent effort of this hike right here, by 3.5 miles per hour, which is my optimal treadmill walking pace. And I can estimate my hiking time to be about 57 minutes. Likewise, without a pack, as in the hike number 1 scenario, my hiking time would be about 39 minutes. Now, this is obviously a simple example on a short trail in easy conditions, but we're developing the MEM framework to be extensible over long distances, variable levels of fitness and pack weights, and of course, terrain that's more reflective of what you'll find on the off trail. Here's an example of that. So we did this article on the metabolic cost of bushwhacking. You can see that article in the QR code that's in the lower left of the screen. But basically what we discovered in our research is that there are 3 types of bushwhacking. There's bushwhacking where the bushes get in your way and slow you down. They provide some resistance but don't impede your progress. And we call this brushwork. That's on the upper left-hand side. You can see the hiker walking through a stand of crumholts. The second is the type of bushwhacking where you have to alter your gait or you have to alter your body's movement. It interrupts and impedes your ability to walk through the terrain. That's impedance work. An example is the middle photo where I'm bushwhacking through a forest of blowdowns in southeast Wyoming. So here, my gait is completely interrupted and I have to go around, over, and under things that I can't push through like I could on the left-hand side. And then the third type is hazard work. And that's shown in the photo on the right. And so this may or may not involve bushes, but it does involve steps that are hazardous if you don't pay attention to them. And they can cause injury or stumbling or falling. And so that's what we call hazard work. And so our work has allowed us to define a bushwhacking scale, which is shown in the table there. And this bushwhacking scale is a grade of 1 to 5. And instead of arbitrary definitions of what sort of bush you're whacking through, it instead identifies that scale based on the metabolic cost of the bushwhacking. And you can see this in the metabolic difficulty ratio in this column here. So if a metabolic difficulty ratio, that defines the relative rate of difficulty as a result of the presence of brush versus the absence of brush. And so we can see that various types of bushwhacking can increase the metabolic cost of traveling a mile through stuff like this up to 10 or more in the most extreme cases. Off-trail travel and the challenging terrain that comes with it induces a level of fatigue that catches hikers by surprise. Here are 3 examples. On the upper left, we have bushwhacking down a stream corridor in dense forest in the rain. So traveling through the forest is not an option here. You kind of have to stay in the stream corridor, which is the most open. This is slick and hazardous terrain with lots of wet rocks and a high slip and fall risk. On the upper right, we have another type of crumholts. This one is growing out of talus at 11,000 feet in Rocky Mountain National Park. And the crumholts here, the crumholts is a subalpine fir stand that grows in little communities. Here, the crumholts is so thick and the talus underneath it is so hazardous. There's holes everywhere. It's so hazardous to walk through because you can't see your feet and you have to figure out how to go around these crumb-hold stands now. So this increases your distance, your hiking time, and your navigation stress. And then on the bottom is an alpine ridge. The photo is taken from an alpine ridge. This is the backside of Longs Peak in Rocky Mountain National Park. Pretty easy terrain all in all, but obviously a ton of weather exposure here that can wear you down over time as you increase your exposure to it. Now, all three of these scenarios induce their own kind of fatigue. And once that fatigue sets in and becomes more than what you've bargained for, it starts this cascading chain of reactions that significantly increases your risk. Accidents tend to unfold as a sequence of small compounding mistakes. And if you review case studies of hiker injuries and fatalities in the wilderness medicine literature, and especially among hikers and climbers who ventured off trail into remote environments, there are, of course, a lot of things that can be attributed as causes of injury. But so many of them start with overexertion, hiking too fast, or climbing too hard, or carrying too much pack weight, all of which, of course, can be related to your base levels of both aerobic and muscular fitness. Overexertion is particularly problematic in cold temperatures because it generates sweat. And that seems harmless in the moment, but it sets the stage for cooling once your activity levels slow down. And then at rest, when your body sheds heat faster than it can replace it, your core temperature drops, fine motor control begins to fade. That's dexterity loss. And the simple tasks that are required for you to execute key skills like cooking or pitching your shelter now become slow and complicated. Of course, once you're cold and tired, decision fatigue sets in. You delay making decisions, or you misjudge distances, or you misjudge time, or you start making shortcuts based on the false belief that the shortcut is going to allow you to achieve some positive outcome. But the temptation to take those shortcuts is often an indicator that your cognition is declining. And then those cognitive lapses lead to errors, misnavigation cues, delaying stopping to set up camp, or not consuming enough calories, inadequate control of your clothing layering, whatever the case may be. And eventually all this leads to discomfort if you're fortunate, and accidents or more serious risks to your health and safety if you're not as fortunate. So pay careful attention to the early triggers, which are related to exertion and moisture, and try to interrupt this cascade before it gains momentum, because the further along you are, the harder it is to reverse and course correct discomfort and injury. When we talk about operating in the backcountry, being in or out of control is not this on-off switch. It lies along a continuum. At one end, you are in full control. You're warm, alert, and capable of processing information so you can make good decisions. Every system, physical and cognitive, is functioning well. Now, as environmental stress increases or fatigue builds, that control margin narrows, and one by one, your performance systems tend to begin to degrade. These four variables, heat, dexterity, awareness, and decision quality, represent the human performance systems that erode sequentially under fatigue. This is why I've spent a bit of time here discussing the metabolic cost of off-trail travel. This control continuum is a useful model for evaluating risk management, which is about recognizing when control is fading and making sound decisions before that degradation leads to an accident. When control begins to erode, the speed at which you make decisions and the process of repetition, so you can string as many decisions together as possible, are critical to your comfort, safety, and survival. Stressful environments require short, recurring loops. You can't have long deliberations with yourself when you're in the midst of a crisis. Being off trail in the backcountry does not give you the same time margins of error that you have when you're hiking on trail or in otherwise mild environments. One of the tools we use in the Wilderness Systems Framework is this Risk Control Flywheel. This is a continuous process of observation, interpretation, decision, action, and evaluation. It usually starts with observation. You're observing new data like the weather, the change in the weather, and the terrain, and your fatigue level, or the morale of your group. And then you start to interpret what those changes mean for your remaining safety margin. You're trying to predict risk at this point. Use that data then to make an informed decision and act, but this is not the place for panic. Slow down your pace, stop and add an insulating layer, alter your route, or start looking for a campsite and stop early. And then after the action has had a chance to play out a little bit, you reevaluate, because each new decision and subsequent action produces new data. This framework is the #1 tool we use to help convert uncertainty into continuous adaptation in the field. And it's how highly skilled backcountry leaders think when control is slipping. They make a bunch of fast, small corrections instead of one large decision that can have dire consequences, especially if you belabor that decision and make that decision too late. These photos are from a winter trip way off trail in Rocky Mountain National Park last year, where I was pretty much hiking with a summer kit, but I got hit with an unexpected blizzard that brought several inches of snow with extremely high winds and very cold temperatures. And I'll admit that I did not optimize my gear system for these conditions, but when they came, I was able to eke out as much performance as possible from my gear, tap into a vast reservoir of experience in these conditions over the course of my career. And that helped me maintain a mental state of calm. And that, of course, led to careful and calculated decisions that included, first and foremost, securing my tent in the wind, making lots of hot drinks, and riding out the storm. Now, in this scenario, I understood the limits of my body, which was fatigued from my route, and I understood the limits of the environment, which was incredibly hostile. So I grabbed a weather forecast from my satellite communicator, and that helped me realize that this was going to be an 8 or maybe a 10-hour storm. And then I tapped into my gear systems and calmed my mind to write it out and make a good decision about what to do. In short, the Wilderness Systems Framework helps analyze a hazardous situation, identify the bottlenecks, and double down on what's working so that you can reduce risk in an adverse situation. Winter backpacking comes with its own set of challenges, and I wanted to mention it here because we're going into the winter season, and it's beyond the scope of this presentation. There's lots of resources here at Backpacking Light in the form of online courses about fringe season backpacking and footwear and traction systems for snow travel, avalanche awareness, and then specific winter backpacking gear systems. And these are all online courses you can access via that QR code. But I will say this about winter. Wintertime creates all sorts of opportunities for traveling off trail. Whether you're hiking or skiing or snowmobiling this time of year, it opens up so much landscape to explore. And it gives you the ability to do routes and visit locations in the backcountry that you might never consider in the summer. Snow and winter obviously come with their own set of hazards, and they require some unique considerations. 4 of them are here. #1 is navigating in a blizzard or whiteout type of conditions. Using your phone app in the winter is a little more challenging than in the summer. And so this needs to be considered. In addition, you may not have visibility into the terrain, and so navigation becomes more of a challenge. Avalanche awareness, obviously. Walking in deep snow, now you need some kind of flotation device if you happen to go into the deep winter backcountry, or if you get caught in the midst of a storm that dumps a lot of snow and you don't have those flotation devices, then you have to start planning on what route can you make to get out with the least amount of effort. And then obviously extreme cold bringing its own set of challenges. One of the most significant differences between summer and other seasons is the amount of cold throughout the night you need to protect yourself against. And so I always like to bring up the comparison where we've got a cold day during the summer here at high altitudes in Colorado. So at 12,000 feet, the overnight low might get down to 20 degrees, and the daytime high might be 45 degrees. There are winter days where you can also have nighttime lows of 20 degrees and daytime highs of 45 degrees. But the difference is in the sun exposure. You are exposed because of the length of the daylight and the azimuth of the sun's trajectory. You're exposed to 4 times more cold during the summer than in the winter. Cold as like total volume, total exposure. So it's much harder to stay warm in the winter than it is in the summer, even though the high and low temperatures might be the same. Keep that in mind. Cold stress, I want to mention that here because from an environmental load standpoint, cold stress often exceeds human capacity, hiker capacity. Temperature, wind, and moisture increase that environmental load. And while your level of physical fitness, your caloric intake, hydration, thermoregulation, and rest can help maintain your physiological capacity, they often are not enough. And so when the environmental load exceeds your capacity, this is when the control begins to slip and you start inching down that continuum. First physically, then cognitively, like we saw a few slides ago. And understanding where this threshold occurs for you is foundational to both skill application and risk assessment, because self-awareness of your physiological limits and self-awareness of the physiological cues that suggest a decline in your capacity are so critical, not only for executing the skills and playbooks required to maintain your capacity, but to understand your options when you're actively managing a risk scenario. A few weeks ago, I was backpacking off trail and took a really hard tumble in a talus field and broke my nose. The moments immediately following this fall were really dramatic. I started to go into shock because I was scared that something really bad had happened. There was tons of blood. I was with a partner who was brand new to this type of hiking, and I was worried about him. It was late in the day. We were tired. Was I gonna have to hike out that night? Did I have a concussion? Would I need to press the SOS button on my sat messenger? My mind was racing a million miles a minute. But once I tapped into my decades of wilderness experience, I realized that I actually possess a lot of emergency medical knowledge, and I could slow down and really assess what happened. And I told myself to focus on doing one small thing at a time. Do the one right next thing. This allows you to slow down. I was able to stop the bleeding. I conducted a thorough patient assessment to rule out head injuries and spinal injuries, and I realized that everything was going to be okay. There's an Icelandic phrase for this, and it's called theta redast, and it says everything will be okay. And I think there are cultural theorists who believe that this philosophy that exists in Scandinavian cultures is a lot of the reason why they're consistently rating so high on happiness indexes. They can tolerate adversity and they can embrace uncertainty with an attitude that is unique. So I guess what I want to say here is that if you spend enough time off trail, you will encounter situations like this more frequently than if you stay on trail. Going off trail increases fatigue, taxes your fitness and recovery, places you on more unstable footing, and exposes you to a more hostile environment. So in addition to developing fitness for off-trail travel, don't ignore the investment of time and energy into learning about risk assessment and emergency management skills as well. Also, don't forget that sometimes accidents happen in really easy terrain. You can see where I fell in the lower right photo. It's on a low angle talus field right along a beautiful and serene shoreline of an alpine lake. And I actually tripped onto a piece of perfectly flat talus the size of a sidewalk, the most improbable place for a fall I could imagine. Let's talk a little bit about route planning, because this is consistently one of the most difficult challenges when it comes to off-trail competency. It's very common to bite off more than you can chew, and effective route planning provides the framework to eat the elephant one bite at a time, or in some cases bypass the elephant altogether and tackle something that's more in line with our appetite. In the summer, I can usually plan out pretty precise routes and dial in route segments and daily mileages and plan campsites. And on a long distance trek, I've learned to be very successful with this type of planning, not just because of my experience in this area, but because I know that in the summer, my margin for error is pretty high because the days are long and the weather is generally okay. And the probability that my route is going to be disrupted for more than a few hours is probably pretty small. However, the type of route map you see in this slide is more in line with how I look at route planning when I go off trail, especially in the fall, winter, or spring, when weather and snowpack and limited daylight create additional layers of uncertainty. Now, this is an extreme example, but it illustrates two key concepts. The first is that based on the weather and snowpack forecast, I'm going to create a set of rough boundaries to constrain the structure of my trip. In this case, we have a weather forecast calling for high winds with cold rain and snow, and I'm going to maintain my energy reserves by, number one, staying off steep talus and scree. Number two, minimize my time spent on slopes greater than 25 degrees. And number three, stay off of peaks and ridges as much as possible with camps near the tree line for some shelter from the weather. Okay, so I'm going to do two things here. First, I'm going to create boundaries to constrain the structure of the routes. And those boundaries are primarily geographical or topographical. Second is that I'm going to create an itinerary that builds as much flexibility as possible within that structure. So this may be the exact map I go out in the field with, and I may have an idea of what I want to do as a plan, but this web of route possibilities gives me lots of options and flexibility. And as you can see on this map, I've drawn in all the possible options for routes that adhere to my route structure boundaries, while still providing me with a variety of options that I can take advantage of if conditions are either better or worse than what I expect. And that brings up a really interesting aspect of hiking off trail, and that's the variability of expected conditions. In summer on trails, especially at lower elevations below the tree line, you can kind of expect to be firing on all cylinders and be able to cover lots of ground if you want to, and the terrain allows for it. And in the winter, it's kind of just the opposite. You know that deep snow and very short nights and very cold temperatures and very steep avalanche-prone terrain are going to constrain the upper boundaries of what you're able to accomplish. But in between those two seasons, you can experience the extremes at the edges of both summer and winter. And that makes it a very satisfying and at the same time a very frustrating time of year because precise trip planning is hard, especially when you go off trail because weather and exposure to the elements has such a profound impact when you're hiking on variable terrain. So in summary here, a well-planned route creates structure defined by risk boundaries, and a well-designed itinerary builds flexibility within that structure. There are some symbols on this map. I'll highlight them here. I look at route planning by identifying route corridors, which are the gray lines you saw on the last slide. Potential campsites, which are shown here by campsite icons. Hazards, which are yellow symbols, and the hazards are usually steep terrain or avalanche hazards. And problematic exposure areas, especially steep or avalanche prone or high altitude ridges exposed to lightning and wind. That's the little lightning bolts on the map. So now my quote unquote route becomes a more flexible system of opportunities and constraints that allows me to adapt more readily on the fly because I've studied this in depth and established some of this criteria before I even leave the trailhead. Let's revisit metabolic energy mile theory again in the context of planning an off-trail route. Here is a route option between two campsites. This campsite is the campsite I came into in the upper part of the screen, and my destination campsite is down here in the lower right. I have an ambitious high route planned, which is this black and red route, which goes over alpine talus and scree with a very steep pass. And then I have a contingency plan, which is this blue route down on the right-hand side. In dry conditions, the metabolic energy mile predicts that the energy mile equivalent of this high route is 14.9 miles. The actual distance is, let's see, what is it? 4.1 miles. So 15 miles of effort required to accomplish that route in dry conditions. And so if you recall from the previous slide, if we divide that by 3.5 miles an hour, which is my most energetically efficient treadmill pace, then I'm looking at a route travel time, moving time, not including breaks, of about 5 hours. So this is a fall trip. So I know that between daylight and dusk, or dawn and dusk, I have to build in 5 hours of moving time to complete that route effectively. Now, if it starts raining or snowing, which was a possibility in this weather forecast, things start to go off the rails pretty quick. This route becomes much more difficult. And now I've got a metabolic energy mile equivalent of 27 miles and an estimated moving time of 8 hours. So if I don't get started until 7 a.m. and it gets dark at 5 p.m., okay, that's a 10-hour window, and I have to be on the move for 8 hours just to get this route done, that puts me at a little bit of a risk. And so this is why I use metabolic energy mile planning to evaluate decisions that I can make based on current terrain. And then I know that I have the blue route in my back pocket. And so even with a wet snow surface, the blue route gets me a little bit lower elevation, more bushwhacking, less steep terrain, and about 12 miles of metabolic energy mile equivalents. And I can complete this route in about 4 hours of moving time. So even if the weather turns bad, I know I have a route in my back pocket and I don't need to retreat. Energy economics is going to be, and by economics, I mean metabolic economics, the metabolic cost is a function of terrain condition, and we can use this to inform route selection decisions. In summary, I just want to say that on trail, you control the rhythm. When you're on trail, you can plow through just about any condition if you have the gear and the fitness and the fortitude to do it. Off trail, if the environment goes off the rails, or the route is harder than what you see on the satellite map before when you're planning it at your kitchen table, the environment controls the rhythm, and you need to be respectful and sensitive of that when you're in the backcountry. A couple of these rhythms that I respect a lot are diurnal rhythms. So natural rhythms throughout the day can dictate your effort and tempo. I'm always at highest energy in the morning, so I like to plan the hardest route segments and most ambitious mileages between the hours of 7 a.m. and say 11 a.m. Between 11 and 2 in the afternoon or so, that's when the temperatures are the warmest. And so I want to count on that to take advantage of that, especially in the fringe season when temperatures are cooler. Count on that to realize that this is my mode of comfortable travel. And then finally, after about 3 p.m., fatigue and cold and waning daylight are going to set in, and I know this is a higher risk scenario for me. Weather rhythms as well can be used to help plan multi-day routes. So I look at long-range weather forecasts and plan my routes accordingly. So here's a trip I was planning where we had heavy rain the first 2 days of the trip, great weather in the middle 4 days, and then light snow and extreme cold coming the latter part of the trip. And we adjusted our route plan accordingly to take advantages of those opportunities and respect those constraints. I want to address the idea of a decision gate in this slide because I think this concept is one of the most important tools you have at your disposal for managing your risk when traveling off trail. A decision gate is a predefined point in time, space, or condition along your route or itinerary where you intentionally stop to evaluate whether to continue, modify, or abort the current plan. And you do this based on objective, measurable criteria rather than your emotions or your momentum. It's a structured checkpoint designed to help you evaluate what's next when facing uncertain or deteriorating conditions. And decision gates exist to help you interrupt complacency. It forces you to have a deliberate evaluation instead of just passively continuing on. Decision gates help prevent drift, stops a team from unconsciously exceeding its safety or control margin. And decision gates can help translate uncertainty into structure, reducing subjective decision-making fatigue during stressful situations. I like decision gates because they act as behavioral guardrails that keep operational control aligned with environmental reality. So on the left-hand side, we have this route starting from the lower left and ending in the upper right. And I've got 3 decision gates here. The first one is I want to reach this pass by 2 p.m. So it's a time gate. If I don't reach that pass by 2 p.m., I'm going back. I don't have the time buffer to safely get to the other side. The second decision gate is snow. If it snows on the south side of that pass, I know the north side, which is filled with talus, is going to be a brutal descent, and I'm not going to go over it. And then finally, I've got another decision gate, same route, right-hand side, which says I got a destination campsite near the top, but if I get to this green area, then I know that I will either camp at this campsite or I will camp somewhere else in this green area once the time hits 5 o'clock. Those are examples of decision gates. Designing a route that can be adapted to risk triggers is probably one of the more valuable skills you can have as a fringe season backpacker. Here's a route where we're starting at this trailhead. The green represents trail corridors, so nice, easy travel. The red represents alpine off-trail travel. And we can see decision gates at point 1, where we start our first off-trail traverse, at point 2, where we have a trail exit if needed, and at point 3, where we have another trail exit if needed. And so we have decision gates in place to say, are things working as a group and environmentally that will allow us to take on this next challenging section? The main difference between on-trail travel and off-trail travel is that in off-trail travel, the relative distances between the nodes on this continuum are shorter. Your margins are thinner. You have less time to course correct, less time to make decisions, and less margin for error if you make a decision that has unexpected negative consequences. I want to throw in one slide here about sleep and recovery because I think you can get away with bad sleep on trail because trails confine you to so much structure, but that margin goes away off trail. And so anything you can do to ensure a good night's sleep, rest and recovery, where you're getting good deep sleep, which is for physical recovery, and you're getting good REM sleep for cognitive recovery, both of those things become far more important once you leave the trail. I mentioned earlier that off-trail travel comes with some increased risks, and by now you are certainly aware of some of those risks, but I also want to emphasize that when you leave established trail corridors, you also leave the door open to more complicated rescue scenarios if you do find yourself in a situation where you need to call for help. Now, I spend a lot of time alone off trail, and solo travel in and of itself creates some additional risk because you don't have a partner to bounce ideas off when you're faced with making difficult decisions, or you don't have a partner to assist you in an emergency scenario. So with that in mind, I do think off-trail travel makes a unique case for carrying a satellite messaging device, which if you're attending today's program, I'm sure you all have one, but a special shout out to ZOLEO for creating such a user-friendly device that gives us things like interpolated weather forecasting and medical assist, in addition to the SOS functions, obviously. And all in all, I would say that having a device like this on hand gives me a lot of confidence when I'm traveling off trail, not because I know I have a search and rescue button at my disposal, but because it gives me a little less anxiety knowing that I do have all these resources at my fingertips. And instead of worrying about the consequences, which I do anyways, if something bad were to happen, I can rechannel that mental energy into being present in the moment and making the best possible decisions that without that cloud hanging over my head. So I want to end today by returning to the question of why. Going off trail is slower. It's harder, it's less forgiving, it's riskier, and at times it hurts. It asks for something the trail does not, which is your full attention and your full humility. A trail built by human hands, it's mapped, it's maintained, it's marked, represents everything we value in modern life: comfort, predictability, and control. It's a managed relationship with the natural world. And staying on trail removes a lot of uncertainty. And with that removes a measure of responsibility, the responsibility to make decisions, to adapt, to find your own way. And none of those things are bad things. I still spend most of my time on trails when I'm out there. They are boundaries on the opportunities that nature can offer if we choose to step beyond them. And the lens through which I see wilderness recreation is rooted in Aristotelian ethics, which is the ancient philosophy that teaches that the purpose of life is eudaimonia, a Greek term that means good spirit. It's often translated as happiness, but it really means something deeper, a state of flourishing and well-being that arises from living with virtue and purpose. Eudaimonia is found not in comfort, but in the continual practice of wisdom, courage, judgment, and self-control. These are the four virtues that Aristotle said form the foundation of a meaningful life. So when I step off trail, I'm not chasing isolation or adrenaline. I used to, but I don't do that anymore so much. I'm seeking a practice in patience, prudence, and courage, a practice in finding that narrow balance between recklessness and fear. Because in that practice, something remarkable happens. The wilderness ceases to be scenery. It becomes kind of a mirror. It reflects back who we are when there's no path to follow and when every decision must be our own. And in that reflection, I find some clarity. It's this quiet understanding that flourishing doesn't necessarily come from conquering nature, but from cooperating with it, reasoning with it, and respecting it. That's the spirit of eudaimonia, and that's why I go off trail. So I will wrap it up there and turn it back over to the ZOLEO team. Thank you so much for your attention today.
Wow, thank you, Ryan. That was such an inspiring talk, and I'm sure everyone here learned a lot and was very inspired too. Now, onto our Q&A. I'm going to pass this on to Lauren to take us through a few of the questions for Ryan. And if you have any more questions, feel free to add them into the Q&A box.
Hey everyone, I'm Lauren and I'm so excited to be here with you today. A huge thank you to all of you and to Ryan for joining us. We've got a couple questions that have been left in the Q&A box. So to start us off, Ryan, we had one individual request that we post the formula for the MEM calculation. Can you walk us through just again kind of what that is?
Yeah. Should I share my screen and go back to that slide?
Sure.
Okay, I'll do that. I don't want to get too heavily into math, but basically the formula defines the energy cost of walking, and it is a function of this M, which is the mass that you're moving, which includes to some extent your body weight and your pack weight. And then there's this collection of functions here that are summation functions. So they are related to the cost of doing work. So moving your body forward or upward. And then these are modified with these disruptor functions, which are defined by delta K here. And there can be several disruptor functions. And those disruptors are related to weather. They're related to your fatigue. They're related to terrain problems. Slippery terrain, things like that. And so basically the energy mile equation defines the cost required to move your body and pack from point A to point B. And then that cost is increased by disruption from your fatigue or the environment or things like that. So that's kind of the basic formulation for it. And, all these are kind of developed in isolation. So there can be an infinite number of each of these functions. We're focusing on some very specific ones that include the terrain underfoot and its condition in response to rain and snow. We are looking at your fatigue level and fitness level, and we are looking at altitude right now. So those are kind of the three big ones in combination with obviously mileage and elevation gain.
Okay, awesome. And it was requested that I post that formula in the chat. However, I don't think I can type out that formula. So we'll be sure to share that in the post-event follow-up.
You bet. Sounds good.
All right, we've got a couple more here. How do you deal with times when your group doesn't agree with what you should do in a tough situation?
There's a couple of ways to manage leadership in these situations. One is leadership by democracy, which is the highest vote gets what you want. And there are a whole bunch of reasons why this does not work in the backcountry, because it can bring people who are uncomfortable or unskilled into situations that increase the risk of the group. The other primary scenario is leadership by consensus, where you are gathering a common, you're creating a solution that the whole group can buy into. In my experience guiding and leading groups, the biggest thing I've found is to have these conversations up front so that you can walk through and role play even some scenarios, so that when you do get into a tough situation, there's no surprises into why and how you are making those decisions.
All right, awesome. I think we should have time for one or two more. So we've got one here. Which apps or programs do you use for determining routes, slopes, etc.? Some examples we got were CalTopo, GeoGPS, OnX. Also, which do you use in the backcountry, if at all?
I use Gaia in the backcountry primarily because of its speed as an app. Now, since Gaia was purchased by Outside, they've had a different sort of development timeline. And so I think it is no longer state of the art in terms of smartphone apps, but it's still a fast app. And that's the main reason I like to use it. In terms of route research, I think CalTopo is probably the gold standard because of the access to so many different types of layers and high resolution imagery. Unfortunately, on the phone, it's a high memory usage app and it runs relatively slowly, so I don't tend to use that in the field. That said, in the fringe season in the winter, when the weather gets worse and I'm wearing gloves or mittens and the apps are harder to use, I will revert to a paper map and often a compass, because I want to keep my electronic devices in my pack, and it just saves battery and saves margin for when I want to use them for communications or listening to a podcast on a 14-hour night or whatever the case may be.
Awesome. You read my mind there. The second part of that question was, do you pack paper copies? Awesome. So I think we can probably squeeze one more in here. We've got concerning a decline in the quality of decision making. Do you have a simple field test for monitoring baseline dexterity and subsequent decline of dexterity? Best would be a self-test, but also applicable to monitoring other teammates.
Yeah, so I have a simple test, which is to touch your thumb to all your fingers in rapid succession and then back. So if that is a hard test to do, I mean, you can see how fast I can do it here. I'm not speedy, but in the backcountry, in a dexterity compromise situation, you will often do this, okay? And your fingers will stick together, and then they might miss each other, or they might be really slow, or you might not even be able to get the fingers together. And those are all, that is based on medical recommendations from wilderness EMTs. That is one of the best self-assessment tests that you can use. The other one is to find a phrase that you can say that's complicated, that's in your memory, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and say it quickly in the field. And if you have a hard time enunciating the syllables or even saying the word, then that isn't also a good self-test indicator.
Awesome. It has been many years since I heard supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. All right. So unfortunately, folks, that is all we have time for today. But if you had submitted a question and didn't get an answer, keep an eye on your email. We're going to be sending a post-event recording, and we'll do our best to address any outstanding questions there. I'm going to pass it back over to Sammy, who is going to take us home with some closing remarks.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for attending our first ZOLEO Campfire Chat. If you have any further questions for Ryan, you can find him on his website, backpackinglight.com, which we will include in the post-event recording email follow-up as well. We look forward to seeing you at our next events. So until then, please stay safe and stay connected. Goodbye.